Now that you've got a basic understanding of the building blocks of ASL, starting with the phonology and moving on to the morphology, you can now start to put those parts together in sentences. So we'll start with ASL Simple Sentences. The first thing that you should understand is something that might be a little bit counterintuitive to you, and that is the basic structure of an ASL subject-verb-object sentence is subject-verb-object. Now, you might be thinking, no, in ASL, you have to have the object first. So if you see a sentence like, Bob see the tree with an affirmative nod, if you see that signed like this, you might say, no, that's English. You can't sign it that way. But that's incorrect. In fact, ASL typically occurs in a subject-verb-object word order. So it's very common to see that form. I have some examples here of other sentences that might be signed in SVO, or subject-verb-object word order. All of these are marked affirmative, as you see the line with the AFF over it, which means that you're going to be nodding your head saying that this in fact did happen. So I've already shown you the Bob sees the tree. Let's see a different one here. I eat the apple, or in all of those you have a subject, a verb, and an object, and that's okay. That's the basic sentence structure of ASL. Now, you do see that frequently, but you also frequently see other word orders, and that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to understand why you commonly see many of these other ASL word order options. Now, to understand how things change from that basic structure, or what's linguists call the deep structure of the language, to some of the different forms that you actually see, or what's called the surface structure of the language, then we have to first take a look at this idea of transformations. A transformation is when you take the basic form and you change it around for a particular reason. And all languages, it seems, does this to some degree. Or all languages do this to some degree. So, for instance, in English, whenever we have a sentence that's subject, verb, object, as most sentences, as the deep structure of English is, a sentence like Bob sees the tree, then you have the subject, the verb, and the object. But whenever you ask a question, you have to do something different. You have to take a helping verb and move it to the beginning of the sentence. So you have to say, did Bob see the tree? Or, for instance, in English, the normal word order is you have a subject, a verb, and a descriptor. So if, for instance, you had the sentence, Maria is happy, but you change it to a question, you have to move that is. Is Maria happy? So that makes the verb go first, and then the subject, and then the descriptor. Similarly, in English, we have active sentences, which are subject, verb, object, Bob sees the tree, but then we have passive sentences, which allow us to rearrange this word order. The tree was seen by Bob. Now, we have different reasons that we use transformations in some situations and not in others, but I want you to understand that in English we do this too. We move the SVO word order into different forms in order to illustrate different ideas or to conform to different grammatical expressions. So, make sure you understand that this is not something unique to ASL. This is something that all languages do. So let's take a look now at some ASL transformations. The first common transformation that you see in ASL is the repetition of the subject at the end of the sentence as a pronoun. So in the first sentence that we've already discussed, we had that sentence, Bob sees the tree. Well, a common transformation that you'll see is the subject, Bob, repeated again at the end of the sentence. But when Bob is repeated at the end of the sentence, the noun itself is not resaid. Instead, a pronoun is said that shows you where Bob is. So you might say, and you might wonder, is that pointing to the tree or to Bob? Well, it's pointing to Bob, because what you expect at the end, that point at the end, is the subject repeated. Now, it doesn't mean it has to happen, doesn't mean it always happens, but it can happen. Another example, with pointing to I at the beginning and I at the end, both pronouns. Or here again with two pronouns, you enjoy the class, you. So, that's the first common transformation. Another transformation that you can see is the deletion of a subject. Now be careful about this. People who are learning ASL love to delete pronouns. They don't say who's doing what. And in general, they do it incorrectly because they don't have the appropriate context to delete the pronoun. If there's no context to delete a pronoun, then you're going to just have a half of a sentence. But in the right context, subjects can be deleted. So, for instance, if you've already been talking about Bob, Bob went to the park, then in your next sentence you might sign to show, oh, he saw the tree. And we assume it's Bob because we've only been talking about Bob. Nobody else is being discussed. Also with directional verbs, like I give you, you give me, well, you're not going to need to sign the subject itself because it's part of the verb. So assuming the subject's already been set up in space, you know, if I sign he gives me, then I know that's whoever I set up over there, he or she gives to me. And then finally, the subjects can be deleted in order to convey general information. People see the trees, people eat the apples, people enjoy the class, when you're not trying to specify a particular person. So, in all these situations, you simply have the sentence signed with the affirmative marker and with no subject. Now, we can also find situations where the subject, where you expect to find it at the beginning of the sentence, an SVO sentence, can be deleted, but then end up showing up at the end of the sentence. Again, it generally only shows up as a pronoun at the end of the sentence. So if we've already been talking about Bob, I may not sign Bob at the beginning of the sentence, but I might at the end simply refer back to him. So if Bob's already been set up on my right, I've already been talking about him, then I might sign to show that he saw the tree. Or if I've been talking about myself, I might sign to indicate I eat apples. Or, again, we know that the thing that's referred to at the end, whether it's a point in this direction or a point to a particular person, refers back to the subject of that sentence because that's what we expect to find at the end. So, you can have the subject at the beginning, the subject at the beginning and the end, or the subject just at the end. But remember, what you see at the end is a pronoun. Next, we find that objects can be topicalized. Now, generally this is done when the object is already known to the listener, meaning whoever you're talking to a person and that person already has mentioned the object or you expect that they know what the object is and you want to bring it up in order to then comment on it. So if we've been talking about a particular tree that's been struck by lightning and it's already been a topic of discussion and you might say, how do you know that it was struck by lightning? And I might sign, when I sign that, I'll say, oh, that tree, the tree you're talking about, that's what that questioning face is. That's why the topic expression, marked with the line and the T, resembles a yes-no question because it's almost as if I'm asking the person I'm talking to, you know the tree? Well, Bob saw it. Or perhaps you left an apple in the refrigerator and you're wondering where it went and I want to confess to you what happened to it. I might sign to show that I've eaten the apple. Or if I'm talking to you about one of my classes, maybe we haven't already been discussing the class itself, but we're just talking and I know that you know what class I'm talking about because of our relationship and because of the context of our relationship, then I might sign, you do enjoy the class. As if I'm saying, you know the class, and I'm assuming you're going to say yes, then you do enjoy it. This is especially common using a topic for the object if you're going to have a sentence that contains a lot of information at the end of the sentence. Classifiers, agreeing verbs, repetitive verbs, locative verbs, things that are going to show spatial information or show modification for repetition. If you want to put that at the end, then you can make the object the topic. Because remember, in an ASL sentence, you generally start with information that's already known to the listener, and you end with whatever you're trying to emphasize. So if you're trying to emphasize visual information, the movement of things, who does what to whom, then you're gonna try to get that to the end of your sentence. And the way that you can do that is by taking an object and bringing it to the beginning by making a topic out of it. Subjects can also be topics. Now you might say, well, the subject's already at the beginning of the sentence. And that's true, but it's not formed as a topic unless you make the topic facial expression and you pause slightly. That is the way that you're asking this question to the listener, and then you can go on to say whatever you want to say about that. So I say, oh, you know Bob? Well, he saw the tree. Oh, I signed it this way. I signed it with the pronoun at the end. Though I could have also signed it with the pronoun at the beginning. So I could have also said, Bob, he see tree. And that would be fine too. And that would be something like, oh, as for me, I eat apples. Or, oh, you know me? I eat apples. And then finally, it's also possible to have both the subject and the object topicalized. In this situation, you're trying to clarify something in a way that's perhaps difficult to understand. Perhaps there are a lot of people involved in a story, or a lot of objects involved, or the spatial relationships are difficult, and so you set each one up as a topic and then go on to say the information you want to say about it. Be careful about overdoing this, because if you do, it sort of gives the impression that you're talking down to someone, or you're sort of explaining something more than is necessary. Also, in this situation, it's typical for the subject to remain in the place just before the verb. You don't usually have things that separate subjects and verbs. So you have that tendency to say Bob, tree, see. That tendency doesn't come from ASL. That's often happens when you have an English user who starts with the subject and then says, oh, I don't want to finish this in English word order, and then they sign tree and see. And that would be an atypical word order in ASL. Usually you're going to have the object, subject, and then the verb if you choose to have both the subject and object topicalized. You're not going to have the subject, the object, and then the verb. You're going to have object, subject, verb. So you see in these examples just that. You see the object, the tree, the subject, Bob, and then the end of the sentence, he sees it. So in this case, I've also incorporated a little bit of visual information because I signed the tree over here, and then I put Bob over here, and then I signed C in the direction of the tree. Because again, I'm trying to clarify these relationships. Or, in that case, I'm being very specific. This class, you enjoy it. Topics can also be used to set up additional information that's not already a part of a sentence. For example, to establish the time that something happened, or to establish the location that something happened. So you might have something like this. Or so in these sentences, you have this extra information that's not a part of the main sentence. It's not the subject, the verb, or the object, but that gives additional information about that. The time, yesterday, the place, their, store, at the store, or perhaps the time and the place, their, USF, last fall. Generally, the information that's put in the topic is the information that's background information. It's information you're not emphasizing. What you want to emphasize or what you want to say about that topic comes at the end of the sentence. So you can expect the information to flow from general information, background information, to specific information and new information.